We're now going to move on to our first panel, which is our tourism leader panel, and I know that many of you will want to hear from those. Ruth Andrews is chair of Fáilte Ireland and has been in a leadership position in the sector over the last 3 decades. Dermot Crowley is CEO of Ireland's largest hotel group, Dalata, who have been valued at an amazing 1.4 billion following their recent acquisition by a Scandinavian consortium. As I said earlier, Alice Manser is unable to join us today, but Siobhan McManamy, who is Director of Markets and Partnerships with Tourism Ireland, which, as we know, is tasked with stimulating demand from key overseas source markets, has kindly agreed to join us. So may as well sit here where I am. You're very welcome, one and all. There we go. Now, Siobhan, I might just maybe start with you. Obviously, the official visitor numbers can be debated somewhat, but what is your recent research at Tourism Ireland telling us about, first of all, the all-important North American tourism market?
I think generally, I think as an industry, we're calling the season as quite flat. I think this year is probably where it's ending up. North America, you know, it's kind of 3 different stories there, really. The luxury market, booming ahead, you know, no slowdown there. I was at the Ryder Cup last week and the premium packages for a day were just selling. Joe Cruz, who works at our GB office, usually was just eyes out of stocks all week at the amount of money they were spending on without thinking. The mid-market then is holding its own, but it changes every month. Up until this morning, there had seemed to be a notion that they were kind of accepting that the chaos and the uncertainty was just the way of life now and they should just go ahead and book the holidays. Now, this morning's shutdown, how that might impact, and that's, I think, the constant worry. And then the budget market is probably a little more uncertain, but that's where we believe mainland Europe can step in, and they.
But your research was interesting because it is sort of giving an insight not just to the numbers, but also the psychology and why people, not just where people are travelling, but why they are travelling. And I suppose that this uncertainty does, in anyone else, but particularly the North American market, they are thinking very selectively, or perhaps more selectively, about where they're going and for how long.
Yeah, and I think particularly the North American market is, they're still travelling the holiday, and I think across all markets, to be fair, the holiday is sacred now. The holiday happens, and they'll adjust the holiday to fit the budget they have available, but the holiday definitely happens. And I think where you're seeing from North America is the big things, and again, pretty much all markets, is everyone wants that sense of exploration is key, and that sense of coming together and disconnecting and being with people. And if you think what we have in Ireland completely matches that in terms of what people are looking for that holiday.
And are you concerned that there is an over-dependence on that market at present?
Yeah, and I think that's the concern, is that if the mid-end and the budget and the high-end, the luxury hold up, brilliant. And that's where the profit is going to come from. But we do need people to start looking more at mainland Europe, and we did a huge bit of work in mainland Europe last year to see where the opportunities are, and we have a clear strategy there now, which will unleash that opportunity for Europe.
And just so interesting, Siobhan, just listening to the Minister talking about, obviously you don't have time to get to everything, but coming in very strong on market diversification. So what does that look like for you? Because that's not an overnight play, that's much more a medium to long-term strategy.
Yeah, and I think for us, market diversification is within North America, so looking at Canada, with the announcement of Aer Lingus of Raleigh as a direct route for next year. We now have 24 gateways from the US next summer. So all of those states, every one of those is a new market for us to go to, away from the traditional ones. And mainland Europe, I think for a lot of industry, going back and looking at mainland Europe, again, is market diversification. Coming in here today, I'd have probably said to you that for us, the opportunity in Asia, the opportunity, untapped opportunity in established markets is far greater. Having listened to the Minister, I suspect you'll be seeing our growth strategy for Asia in the not too distant future. But yeah, there's so much untapped potential. So for us, market diversification is expanding to new gateways in the US, mainland Europe.
I remember years ago, during Brexit, the B word, during the Brexit ready talks, remember this hotelier from one of the border counties, I won't say it just in case her cheeks saw identification, he just said, market diversification, I can't move my effing hotel to China.
Yeah.
I won't say the county because it might be identifiable. Dermot, I know you have been quite outspoken on challenging the official CSO monthly figures, but you've got a pretty good bird's eye view on what's happening given your position in Dalata. So are you echoing what a lot of people are discussing? Is it flat? Or what?
Yeah, I mean, like it's funny, statistics can cause you problems because we were going through a strategic review sales process. And like the people who were looking at Dalata just could not understand. And we're getting quite worried about the potential fall in tourism. But what we saw in the first half of the year in Dublin and right around regional Ireland was occupancies slightly down, maybe 1.5 percentage points, and average room rates slightly up. So RevPARs is broadly flat. A bit weaker when we went into July and August. But when you look at months in any hotel market, like June was well down on last year because June last year was an absolute incredible month in terms of events. September has been a huge month for Dublin because of the American football. So what we're seeing really is, generally speaking, flat RevPARs. But of course, that's not a good situation for the industry because the costs are going up so much on the other side. So that is creating, I'm sure, for smaller operators especially, a lot of margin pressures. But generally, yeah, we are seeing flat versus last year.
Yeah. And how's that going to change?
Like, it's you see, we've got to look back at 2023, right? 2023, the growth in 23 was much higher than anyone expected, right? So then that has an impact on 24 and 25. So I'd be still optimistic that the Dublin market and the regional Ireland market, the regional Ireland market has been really strong. If you look back first to 2019, average room rates were up substantially, and margins then as a result are up substantially. I suppose when we look at Ireland and we compare to the UK, where we've got obviously nearly half our business at this stage, like the UK is a really challenged market, and we can see that coming into Ireland as a source market that's particularly challenged. So how will it change? In time, as supply gets absorbed into the market, you'll get increases in peak times. But what you do need in any city for our industry is a good spread of events and well-planned events. Because the one thing I will say is when you have a Robbie Williams concert on the same night as the American Colleges football, it's a bad experience for everyone because no one can get a taxi, no one can get a hotel, no one can get a restaurant. So I think better planning of events is really, really important as well.
And obviously the Minister was speaking earlier about the importance of that. Ruth, just reflecting on the Minister's maiden participation here at ITIC, I mean, obviously the programme for government did acknowledge the role of tourism in terms of its importance to the long-term economy as well as being such an indigenous employer. But obviously, we got a little bit of a hint about the new tourism strategy, and it's good to hear that there will be consultation on that. But how important is policy? And you're sort of poacher turned gamekeeper now. So how important is policy as an enabler for that?
Sure. Well, look, I think, we've always had policy, which actually is that overarching framework for how we're all going to deliver in that space. And it's really important that this minister, as you heard this morning, is clearly ambitious about his policy and what he is going to look for in terms of, and obviously hopefully going to support that with the relevant investment based on his success.
Everything.
But research and evidence is really important, and having really good research is really important. But I think also, he'll keep the focus very much on balanced regional growth, because that is critical for Irish tourism. 70% of the jobs are out there in those regions. And really it's also about developing out supporting the industries that are in it. So, all of the skills and the upskilling and the capacity building, which we've done through employer excellence programs, all of the productivity supports and the resilience, making businesses more resilient, particularly in an environment where inflation and costs are really impacting the ability to perform. And just, I suppose, going back to DEDPs, we talked about those mature destinations, but there are also parts of those destinations. So if we look at DEDPs, and I think if we could just kind of show a slide here, because part of the Minister's policy, I am sure, will talk to the long term, not just the immediate requirements of the industry, which are always very important. But this just gives you a sense of when you have policy, you can actually look at how you're going to change the footprint of the visitors, right? Be they international or domestic. So you look at this heat map and you look at where the visitors were in 2017, and now you look at where they went to in 2023. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because policy enables agencies to work with industry. So the destination development plans that we're doing, there's 26 of them already live. There's, you know, another 6 or 7 to go, whatever else. But that leads to this dispersion. That leads to visitors staying longer. It creates opportunities to actually build out those seasons.
And it looks like one of Timmy Mallett's unexpected sort of plans there.
Well, we just have to put his bike tour in there.
We could superimpose his bike plan on that. The minister, new minister, new tone, somebody comes from an economic background, a chartered accountant, I think.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, by background.
Yeah.
You've asked for it, you've got it, you're in an economic portfolio. And so did it surprise you, that kind of the tone and the pace in terms of there's going to be KPIs for it, or is this just this is what you get when you ask for it?
Look, every policy, and the minister's policy will be no different, that frames the strategic development of the agency's strategic statements, their 3-year plans, their business plans. All of those come with KPIs. All of those are agreed with our parent department. And what's really great about this minister is his energy, his enthusiasm, his ambition. As you say, we asked for it, we've got it, we've got to deliver it. And if he certainly is going to deliver for us, we've got to put our best foot forward. And you know, we will absolutely work with the minister in terms of helping him in terms of that policy delivery or development, but also it is our job to deliver that. And the industry then will have a very stated ambition about what the government are investing. It's taxpayers' money, so we have got to deliver back on that. And we're here to enable the industry to be able to do that. And it's all about sustainable jobs. I mean, jobs is where it's going to be at, and particularly in rural Ireland.
Can I, Dermot, just go to you on the whole, and you just mentioned a little bit there just earlier, obviously one of the big themes has been on pricing, value for money. Colin Hunt, I think, was quite defensive, saying, you know, it's no different than going to some other big places where there might be that sticker shock, I think, as he described it. The minister kind of towing a middle line, kind of saying, you know...
He wasn't a few weeks ago.
not reusing some of the terminology, but also calling out perhaps what he sees as some excessive pricing. Do you think we are an expensive destination, and are we value for money?
Well,
is the accusation against the hotel sector?
Well, I think it's extraordinary that in one of the most important industries in terms of employment and in terms of regional employment, that we can have a politician calling us thieves, which is what happened, right? I find that just incredible. Like, our average room rate for the first 6 months of the year in Dublin was €153. And that's very good value, right, for 4-star hotels right around the capital city. But to give you an example of the kind of news that goes on, I was listening to an interview with a politician, who won't say who it was, before the All-Ireland football final, and saying, he said, impossible to get a hotel for less than €500 the weekend of the football final. So I, the night before, the Friday night before the football final, just did a quick search of what we were selling our hotels at. And like Clayton Burrington Road, I think, was around $240, Clayton Charlemont, $260. You could stay out in Leopardstown for about $220. So, like, what's actually happening, I think, in our domestic market is people don't even check anymore what the prices are in Dublin, because they make an assumption that it's going to be too expensive. Now, of course, if we were asking me the prices we were charging last week for the NFL, much higher. But that's what surge pricing is. That's what dynamic pricing is. And when you hear people saying it's only the hotel industry, well, it's not. I mean, airlines do it. I would say I'm big into, I'm in Kilkenny, I'm big into cork hurling, I might get killed. But if you think of it right, I'll sit in the same seat in Croke Park for a semi-final. 2 weeks later, I'll be in exactly the same seat, and it'll cost me 30 or 40% more. I fully expect that. I fully accept it. I don't see anything wrong with it, right? So it happens with concerts. It happens in sporting events. It even happens with cups of coffee. It does, right? Okay. So you go to other cities in Europe where we operate. This never comes up as an issue. It's just an accepted part of the hotel industry. So as an industry, we do need to give ourselves a better sell on this, right? This is normal, it is accepted practice. people need to understand that if you're going to stay in Dublin in December, most of our hotels will cost you 140, 150 euro a night. So I think it's a very unfair accusation, and I find it extraordinary to do it in an industry that's such a huge employer.
Okay, Siobhan, Draghi report, so many other reports, just pointing to how competitiveness is drag on the European or the Eurozone economy, and obviously the government has set up this dedicated trade forum, amongst other initiatives, to try and to make us more competitive. And I'm just wondering, in terms of, if this is our price point, what is going to be the differentiator? If we are perceived as a premium destination, well then, that's where then the value proposition really then comes into play. So how are you going to convince visitors that we are worth it?
Yeah, and I think the value for money is one part of it. So, Joe, the latest research was about 51% said we were good value for money, and that ranged from 70% to the US to 38% in the Netherlands. Worth it is a slightly different thing, because worth it is about the perception of, is the destination worth it? So this first came up when we were doing our mainland European appraisal last year, where people said, yep, they accept Ireland is now an expensive destination because the costs are expensive. But are we worth it? And the impression they were giving was that Iceland and Norway is worth it, but Ireland isn't. And a lot of things fed into that from Ireland is just so familiar to them. We had charters in the 80s from Europe, which saved the industry back then, but that left this lingering perception. But the marketing challenge then is to elevate it, so it is aspirational as a destination. So we're out with a new shoot for our new campaign at the minute, which is about just aspirational, and it's about making every experience iconic, putting the best out there all the time. So it is braggable, it is something we want to tell about. And there's so much brilliant evidence of that. I don't know, there was a taste former from the GB, Laura Jackson, who was did a 2-week thing on her family holiday. And every experience, from the B&B to the self-catering to the hotel she stayed in, every experience was an aspirational experience. They cycled in the Aran Islands, they went to a session in a pub, but everything was something that you really felt you desperately wanted to do before you die. And that's the marketing challenge for us, which we're bringing into next year.
Ruth, I suppose that, that there can be a threshold for people because price is so sensitive, so I think it can be a question of degree as much as kind. And there is a point at which, when you look at all of the cost of business, the, increased, I think it is a very competitive sector, but that increased affordability can sort of tip over at times. So again, where are we going to drive that value proposition if there isn't too much wriggle room on price?
Look, where we have to drive the value proposition is by, making sure that the proposition that we're offering delivers in terms of quality. So it is a case of, will the customer feel that they are actually getting, they're getting their value, and it was worth it to spend that money on that experience. And I think a lot of it's about, helping businesses to really enhance their experiences. It's about service levels. It's about looking to, make sure that the product that we have isn't getting tired, that we're supporting that in terms of investment. And it is also about, the times of year and the customers that we're after. If you're going to go anywhere in the peak of a season, no matter where that is, you are going to pay more, but there is terrific value to be had. And again, it comes back to when you create those unique experiences, and it is about authenticity, and it is about uniqueness, and it's about Ireland selling itself as you can only have this experience here because they come here to have the scenery, the culture, the heritage. It's about the people as well. So that's what's special about Ireland. And as Siobhan said, the marketing piece, and it's true internationally as it is domestically, and we, as Fáilte Ireland, obviously are responsible for ensuring that domestic market thrives and that we're really giving the customer an exceptional experience and driving that demand when businesses have it to give at really great value.
Dermot, so many of the items we were discussing with the Minister and also with Colin Hunt relate to that sort of intersectionality between infrastructure, cost of living. I know that at Dalata you are supporting your own staff, just even with enhanced meals and everything else to help them meet the cost of living crisis. When it comes to that important piece about CapEx and infrastructure for accommodation generally, but also specifically for hotels and everything else. Are we getting that right at all, or are we still far behind?
I don't think it's anything specific to our industry. I think it's the country as a whole. And like, it is great to see the minister's tourism being in economic industry, first of all. I think that's going to be a huge plus. And what I listened to him this morning, I thought was very impressive and very encouraging. But I think infrastructure, for us, what it does to our business is effectively, if there's a lack of housing, our people are paying higher rents, right? And therefore they're really struggling to make ends meet.
So you can understand why, for example, there is that demand for the increase in the living,
Absolutely.
the minimum wage.
I mean, we can see it for the people working for us. So what we try to do is give people really good meals 5 days a week, because food's a big part of your budget if you're at that lower wage rate. So that is the biggest impact it has. Then obviously, you know, for the tourist, like, Dublin's not the easiest to get around, or Cork or Galway. Like, you know, like if you're in any major city in Europe, you know, you're going to have a good rail transport. You're going to be hopping off trams. Dublin is more difficult to get around, as is, to be honest. You know, like we talk about Dublin, if you're in Galway, you're stuck in traffic forever, right? So I think that infrastructure, there's a big deficit there that impacts on both the staff, and then we need to pay people higher. Like our minimum wage now in Ireland, I think, is only behind Luxembourg, right? But it's actually very hard to argue against the level it's at, given the expense.
But inflation has eroded many of the gains that have been made in terms of the living wage co-op. For you, Ruth, what are the gaps?
You know, I think the gaps, when you think about the SMEs and the indigenous industry that we are, and it's fantastic because the Minister absolutely is laser focused on SMEs and building out their resilience, etc. And these are businesses, by the way, that, you know, are impacted by external shocks and structural changes far quicker than those larger businesses. So it's the family hotels, it's the cultural experiences, it's the guides, and they are all critical to actually delivering that uniqueness that we talked about that makes us all that bit more competitiveness. So I think
especially their vulnerability in the off-season. And
absolutely, absolutely. So it is about helping them in terms of looking at resilience and looking at their cost base and seeing how we can assist them to make interventions there. It's about skills development and upskilling, making it easier for them to find staff and to retain them, which is really important. And I think it's also true to say that for SMEs, it can be very difficult also to get access to funding. So we need to look at that, and I know the Minister again.
And that's why I was trying to probe both Colin Hunt and the Minister about that, because it is, are the supports there, and if they are they actually accessible in practice? And
I do think as well, you know, again, just going back to that piece that I talked about earlier in terms of developing out the infrastructure, like when you see the level of investment that across government and particularly in tourism that we're making in infrastructure, be it greenways and blueways, etc. When you think back to the first greenway that was up in Mayo, and that just changed Westport and Castlebar. It changed the whole dynamic of who was going there, what they were doing when they got there. It generated that whole awareness. It spawned new businesses.
For the internal market as much as the external.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's really important. So I see huge opportunity because so much of that infrastructure has been happening and has been developed, and we're developing more of it. And even when you look at Ireland's Hidden Heartlands, I mean, the Just Transition Fund and the money that the government enabled us to have from Europe.
It's going to get a big boost from Timmy next year.
Well, no better, man.
Including Longford. We have not forgotten Longford.
But it's important because that, again, it creates real stickiness and opportunity for visitors, reasons for visitors to go there. And that absolutely helps SMEs.
Siobhan, just finally, before we wrap up, and thank you for stepping in at short notice. Tourism Ireland is constantly researching the market, and sometimes I like going into the sort of devil in the detail of your reports because it can throw up sort of some interesting or surprising trends. Is there anything sort of that's skulking or coming through that we should be keeping an eye out for?
I think the extreme weather one is an interesting one in our last piece.
Are we going to be a coolcation?
Yeah, the kind of coolcation emergence. Back in 23, it was 1 in 4 were saying that extreme weather was going to impact our holiday decision. It's now 1 in 3. We're seeing declines in interest in Spain, Greece and Italy starting to come through in intent, and less people talking about the Irish weather as a barrier to come to Ireland.
As an attraction, maybe?
As an attraction. So there's something in that emerging, and public transport, I think, is the other one, and I think that'll be a big focus over the next year or two, is just making that public transport really accessible to the visitor, because we want to get people out to the communities. Our public transport is good. We're the biggest critics of it. Our overseas teams would think it's good relative to what they have. But if we can make that more accessible to the visitor, 2/3 are saying now they prefer to travel by public transport, or they'd like to travel by public transport on a holiday.
As we were saying
so
to Colin earlier, the sustainability thing hasn't gone away,
Yeah, it hasn't.
That hasn't. Well, look, that's all we have time for. To Siobhan, Dermot and Ruth, thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you.